for coming. I guess if anyone doesn't want to be recorded, now's the time, or maybe that would have had to been at birth. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you folks hear me okay? Great, amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Is that okay? What's that? Yes, totally. When we're speaking, it's better to take it off. Okay, everyone ready? Everyone ready? Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started now. Welcome to this UBC Climate Emergency Town Hall from Declaration to Transformation. My name is Avi Lewis. Okay, let's clap. We are gathered. And actually, our friends and guests on Zoom can hear there's a beating hearts and minds here in this room. My name is Avi Lewis. I'm a filmmaker, a climate activist, and as of recently, an associate professor in the geography department here at UBC. We are coming to you today from UBC's Point Grey campus, located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And rather than that ritualized land acknowledgement that is all too common these days, I want to invite everyone participating in this event to consider the entire event an acknowledgement of what is happening on the land, which is, as we know, an escalating climate-driven flooding disaster in the midst of which Indigenous land defenders have been targeted by the BC government, which dispatched heavily armed RCMP officers to remove Wet'suwet'en members from their own territory, Indigenous leaders who have been blocking the progress of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. These land defenders have been targeted and subject to colonial violence for years as they are attempting to address the root causes of the climate crisis by stopping fossil fuel expansion on their lands. And so for all of that, those of us who are settler climate activists are grateful. And we're gathering in a spirit of solidarity, of urgency, and determination in this moment of cascading and overlapping disasters. We have wonderful speakers here today: Kanahus Manuel, Naomi Klein, Nagata, Anjali Apadurai. Very honored to have Chief Ninawá of the Huni Indigenous people of the Amazon, who just arrived in Canada. Before we get to our guest speakers, thank you. We're going to start with a report ripped from the headlines report from the front lines of this crisis moment. And just before we try this, I just want everyone to know that in the spirit of emergency mobilization, things may be a little rock and roll tonight. So be prepared. We apologize at the outset to the audience here at UBC and online for any technical difficulties we have. Please bear with us. The student organizers from Climate Justice UBC, have done an incredible job. But we have pulled this together incredibly quickly. Our tech support team has come up with this very DIY setup. Nobody touch this little box right here. Okay. If everything works right now, we're going to be joined by Brandy Morin, who is an award-winning Indigenous journalist and who is in the middle of covering the ongoing events in the Yinta of the Wet'suwet'en. Brandy is joining us from the airport where her flight is already boarding. So this will be quick. Brandy, can you hear me?
Tomze, yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Brandy, welcome. Brandy, I've been watching your reports on tenterhooks. They've been intense and beautiful and layered and meaningful. As an audience member, I wanted to start by thanking you. And also just thinking that you've been doing this for a really long time and you've been through this extraordinary experience just in the last week. Where are you at? How are you feeling? What have you seen? What's up?
Taniki, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was a very heavy week. I came in just about an hour and a half. I arrived on the Yinta escorted by a hereditary chief named Gistewe about an hour and a half after they had the coyote camp, and all of the land defenders were, in jail. So when I actually first went into the territory, I felt like I was being smuggled in because, the RCMP had checkpoints all over the place, and this was, Gistewe's territory. It was just a wild experience. Um, I mean, when I do these type of stories as an Indigenous woman, I'm impacted by them. I'm passionate about these stories, but the goal is to bring the voices of our people to the forefront, who historically our voices have been stifled, but our people are at the forefront of this crisis of climate change. And it's about time that the world here's our voices front and center. So usually when I'm on the road in situations like this, I'm stressed out. I have nightmares. I can't sleep. It's a very traumatic experience, but I have to tell you something. I spent some time on the Unistoten healing camp, and I was invited to stay there, and I slept there. And despite all this chaos unfolding around us, and RCMP helicopters circling them, and literally, the armies coming in to forcefully remove these people from their lands, like, I was at such peace at this place. It's literally a place of healing, and it's next to this, Wazinqa, this stunningly last of its kind river system in the world that they're standing to protect, the last of its kind that that humanity hasn't completely destroyed and exploited. And I just was stunned by the peace that I had there. And so I'm taking that with me, and I'm taking that home with me. Um, you know, their fight is not over. They tell me they will not leave their Yinta, and they will continue to protect their Yinta, to protect their, their sacred river from destruction. And, Frida Houston, the matriarch that started this all from Unistoten, she moved out onto her Yinta over 10 years ago and started living off the land because our people were herded onto reserves. And the government told our people where to go and where we could hunt and when we could leave. And our people now are going back to our land, and they're going back to reclaim that and to restore that and to care for these lands and to protect for them. But Frida told me she's not worried. And Frida was at peace. And she says, all of this darkness and this evilness, corruption, it's being exposed. It's being exposed to the light. And she's not worried, even though their fight is not over. She just has faith that that project won't go through, and that for her children and grandchildren and all these generations to come will still be able to have that beautiful Yinta, and prayers for other territories to still be able to have their Yintas, their territories to reclaim and restore for all of our future generations. Hi.
Brandy, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Very moving and powerful setting of the scene. I have so many questions for you, but I think you have to get your flight.
Yes, I would love to do this again with you again one time. I consider it such an honor and a privilege, and I just thank you for putting this at the forefront because, as BC, keeps bearing the brunt of this, climate emergency, and the people here are fighting to protect the lands so that, to bear the brunt up here, it's just all the attention is going to that crisis and that disaster in southern BC, and yet hardly any attention was brought up here with the fight to protect so that that doesn't continue. So I'm thankful, for you guys, bringing this to the attention of your platforms and audiences. Thank you. Hi.
I wish you could see everybody here. Thank you, and let's do this again soon.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, that worked. We're, we're on a roll. What a beautiful opening. So the plan is to hear very short speeches from all of our invited guests. And then we have a mic here at the front. We're going to open up the conversation to students here in the room and try to weave in some of the questions and reflections coming into the Zoom as well. Our goal here today is simple: to come together, to listen and process this moment of climate breakdown and the simultaneous militarized response to land defenders on the front lines of climate action, and this incredibly consequential moment that we're in this province right now on these lands, and to ask, with British Columbia on the front lines of both climate breakdown and new fossil fuel extraction, what can we do with this university to move society to the justice-based policies and actions that keep our communities safe? What strategies, what tactics, what justice-based plans will shift us into living on emergency footing, not merely proclaiming and declaring emergencies, but acting collectively like we are in overlapping emergencies? That's our task here today. And so I'm going to throw it first to Naomi Klein, who is an associate professor at geography as I am. We share just about everything, including a title, but not this one. Naomi is also part of the leadership team of the Center for Climate Justice, which I think had its bureaucratic birth today at some meeting. Naomi's going to quickly frame some of the remarks that follow.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Hello, hello. Okay. Well, it's wonderful to be with you. This is my first public event at UBC since joining this incredible place. I'm going to be talking a little bit more at the end after I've heard from all of you. And that this event really is about hearing from you. And it really is about the need to gather together. There's only so much that we can cope with on our own, looking at these terrifying events through our screens, feeling overwhelmed, feeling outrageous dissonance of living through these staccato climate disasters, these fatal climate disasters, and then watching the BC government and the federal government unleash this horrific force on the people who are protecting their lands, their water, their rights, and the planet for us all. It is backwards and upside down, and our job is to turn it right side up. It's going to take all of us. I'm only here at UBC because of student organizing and faculty organizing. And this event is called From Declaration to Transformation because organizing among students, among faculty, has pushed this institution to say a lot of the right things. But we still have a long way to go before we're doing enough of the right things. And so we have to keep organizing. We have to be building alliances inside the university and outside of it. And I'm so excited to be working with all of you. I'm gonna pass it back.
Thanks, Naomi. We're going to have another guest coming from the land. Kanahus, can you hear us? Just make sure that we can check in with Kanahus before I do a big introduction.
Yes, I can.
Hi, my sister.
Hey.
It's Avi here. Kanahus Manuel of the Tiny House Warriors is on Secwepemc territory, where she has been fighting the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline project for years, and has a unique perspective on this intersection of climate emergency and Indigenous rights as a climate solution. Kanahus, I just want to ask you what your thoughts and feelings are at this moment of multiple emergencies on these lands.
Well, definitely, I feel like this is a crisis situation. We know how we deal in crisis situations, especially with Indigenous people. We work awesome in crisis situations because we've been doing it since contact. Some of the things that we're dealing with right now, really is just the trauma that we feel as Indigenous people when colonial governments and corporations go into our territories to criminalize us, to assault us, to terrorize us, really, as we go out and reclaim back our inherent right, which is our territory. We're reclaiming our responsibility to defend our land, to defend our water. This is an ancient responsibility. This isn't something that we just wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to become an environmentalist. No, we're born into this. We're born because our blood is Indigenous. The DNA comes from this land. We're born from the land, as Chief Was was saying, the land that bore us into this world. We come from Secwepemc-Uluk. It's the largest of the unceded Indigenous territories in all of British Columbia and Canada. And in that case, we have a very big responsibility. I come from a long lineage. My grandfather, Dr. Grand Chief George Manuel, and my father, late father Arthur Manuel, left this legacy for us and left a legacy for our family to continue. And that is to continue to keep Indigenous rights and title at the forefront. This is about land. This is about self-determination. And if people really want to protect the environment and save the earth, they're going to have to respect Indigenous land and self-determination, and that we have rights to make decisions about our lands. We have rights to stand up and defend our land without being criminalized.
Kanahus, you've done a lot of work educating people about the use of injunctions as a legal mechanism. And the RCMP arrests and attacks have taken place on behalf of serving an injunction. And I know that you face them as well, and a lot of contact with the criminal justice approach to what you're doing on the land. Do you want to take a moment and reflect on the sort of state of play of the land defenders and the mechanisms that are being used against you in this moment where there are significant parts of the province underwater and communities and tens of thousands of people reeling from the reality of climate emergency?
Yes, first, I think that the Canadian federal government needs to put the crisis over the infrastructure of the land, the highways and the railways and the ports that were completely shut down because of this climate chaos and these torrential rains. They should put that as their first priority rather than raiding the Wet'suwet'en communities off of injunction, illegal, what we calling an unlawful court injunction issued to the Coastal GasLink to remove the Wet'suwet'en people. We call these injunctions thousands of trails of tears, these injunctions that are forcibly removing Indigenous peoples off their lands to make way and make access for corporations. My father called these injunctions Canada's legal billy club. And that's what the RCMP are armed with when they go into these unceded territories to push Indigenous peoples off and make access to these corporations. I don't believe that Indigenous people should fall under these blanket injunctions that just apply to any Jane Doe, John Doe. So anybody walking their dog on the Trans Mountain Trail can be arrested under an injunction. The legal tests used to get these court injunctions are wrong. One of the legal tests being the balance of convenience, where they take a corporation's so-called investment into the land, Indigenous people's investment into the land, and they never look at Indigenous people's thousands of years of sweat equity, blood, sweat, and tears and investment into the territories. All they're looking at is the corporation and what they've monetarily invested into it. We've been dealing with injunctions since 2001 when I was named in an injunction with the Sun Peak Ski Resort. We had almost 100 arrests. It held us up in these court delays for years. We even went up to the Supreme Court, and my twin sister and my mother brought it up to Supreme Court only to drop it because of just the amount of length that it took and resources it took from our very small little grassroots organizing. And, these court injunctions, they that's what they're using right now for any Indigenous person that leaves the Indian Reserve to claim back territory, is they're using these injunctions. They using these injunctions on us, and we're just millimeters outside of this injunction zone, living in 6 of these tiny houses that we built this beautiful village with. But trust me, they want us gone.
Kanahus, thank you so much for joining us today. I wish we were out there with you, or that you were with us here, but it's really amazing that you were able to zoom in. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go next to Kai Nagata, who's the communications director for Dogwood. Kai has been tweeting up a storm as usual and observing these events at the intersection of all these crises. Kai, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Avi. One
Amazing.
second, I'm just untangling my earbuds from my mask on a ferry deck in Prince Rupert.
Basically trying to cover every mode of transportation here. Actually,
Hello.
Anjali, could you go to the train station for the next bit? Yeah. Kai, thanks for joining us, and the ferry connection seems good so far. I just want to ask you the big picture question of where you think we're at in this moment. You've heard some of the other speakers setting it in context of the conflicts and of the emergency. What do you feel this moment is telling us?
Well, I'm standing here on the deck of the ferry in Prince Rupert, looking out over waters that were plied by HBC gunships 200 years ago. And I have to say that we haven't come very far since then. My impression is that we are living in sort of a historical echo of the 1820s, which was before the creation of British Columbia and the formation of the RCMP, but where corporate power, naked corporate power, was exercised on the land base and used to criminalize, intimidate, and kill Indigenous people who defied the trade monopoly of the Hudson's Bay Corporation. And so, yes, cosmetically, some things have changed, but structurally in BC, we are still in a situation where the state and its security forces are subservient to these corporations, and where Indigenous rights and title is completely ignored in service of resource extraction, profit making by these companies. And so, just to cite one example from the Olympic Peninsula in the 1820s, I mean, imagine Blackwater mercenaries in Iraq. You had HBC mercenaries who essentially mounted house raids, and when people challenged their monopoly or fought with their traders, they would land before dawn, burst into people's homes and shoot them in bed, and then burn their villages to the ground. And we are not that far in 2021 from that form of corporate power being exercised through guns and fire. And so, you know, we've had this period in between where we created this bureaucracy and we created the police and we made it all nice and tidy with injunctions and courts. But the direction that we're headed, what I've witnessed, is a return to essentially privatized security, infringing directly on Indigenous rights outside of the sort of legal niceties of the Crown. So what I'm talking about is Coastal GasLink contractors take it upon themselves to essentially detain people and restrict their movement on Wet'suwet'en territories. I almost had the forks of a front-end loader come through my windshield at 80 kilometers an hour on a public forest service road because I was trying to cover an action by Wet'suwet'en enforcement officers on the Coastal GasLink route, and rogue Coastal GasLink security took it upon themselves to endanger my life and that of others and restrict hereditary chiefs from their territories. And in the most recent action, they're the ones transporting and housing the RCMP. They're the ones shuttling them to Giksand territory, hundreds of kilometers away from the pipeline. And it's either the RCMP or Coastal GasLink that are burning down the cabins now on Wasis territory. So very much like the 1820s, the question is where do we go from here? And I think obviously the answer has to be that we dismantle the RCMP, that we reduce the ability of the state to enact this violence on behalf of these corporations. But we have to be really careful about what comes next, because we can't go back to a totally privatized security apparatus. And we have to be really careful about the government trying to create new police bodies like a provincial OPP or SQ that would essentially fulfill the exact same role. And so the last thing I'll say is just that, I've also had the privilege of witnessing here on the coast and on Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en territory, Indigenous law enforcement bodies. I'm not talking about police. I'm talking about stewardship and enforcement officers who monitor the territories and enforce Indigenous laws. And what we are seeing right now is that those people like Zahel and Sebesa and Wet'suwet'en territory, like Colin Sutherland Wilson, who joined them on an operation to seize and confiscate Coastal GasLink heavy equipment, those people are being criminalized. And when those two systems of law come into conflict, the Crown and the RCMP don't hesitate to arrest hereditary name holders and enforcement officers who have been delegated by these traditional governments to carry out eviction orders or to enforce or to monitor their territories. And so I think we need to be vigilant about our government's attempt to transform the RCMP into some other kind of policing body or to outsource that back to corporations. And we need to really recognize and lift up the jurisdiction of Indigenous law enforcement and the people who are out there actually putting these ancient laws into practice on unceded territories. We need to recognize those laws. We need to respect the orders like fisheries closures or travel restrictions or pipeline evictions, and we need to push our colonial government to do the same. So I'll leave it there for now.
Amazing. Kai, I appreciate the big picture and looking ahead to a whole different notion of how enforcement takes place and who owns that term. But you're an organizer, and we have a couple hundred people here in a university atrium. What are the short-term calls to action that you're hearing that you think are worth amplifying for folks who really want to get involved and get something done? We saw a Shut Down Canada movement a little over a year ago around this exact same struggle. We've seen some solidarity protests across the land, not at the same level yet. I feel like I think it's too early to tell whether they're gathering force or not. But where are you asking people to direct their energies? What are you suggesting?
Well, there's some obvious short-term acute needs. There's financial support and legal aid for the people who are being criminalized. And there's, of course, a need to translate this into political risk for the people who authorized this operation. We're likely headed into an NDP leadership race at the provincial level within the next few months, maybe the next couple of years. And so that's an organizing opportunity for people who have not yet torn up their NDP membership cards and discussed. But there's also, I think, a longer term need because, as has been said many times before, these crisis moments sort of show us the sum of our organizing to date. They sort of show the relationships we've built. And obviously, we are weak in comparison to guys in camo with assault rifles. We are weak as a movement compared to the power of the state and of these foreign investors in Coastal GasLink. And this has been a show of force. This has been a reminder of where we stand. And so we need to get stronger. And the question is, what relationships do we need to prioritize in order to, next time, we know there's going to be a next time. There were 3 raids in a row, 3 years in a row. And we know that the state does not hesitate to pull the trigger in operations like this. And so next time, what does the response look like? And what are the relationships we need to develop with other sources of organized community power in BC in order to change that equation, in order to prevent the next raid and to ensure that there are devastating political consequences for anybody who imagines authorizing something like this in the future. And so I think that just goes back to who we know and who shares our values and who within the geography of BC has tasted the pointy end of state power and knows the meaning of solidarity. And so I think that there are too many communities to name individually right now, but I would really look at like who are you affiliated with? Who do you share geographic space with, and who do you share values with? And how could you translate the outrage that you feel today for those allies so that next time this happens, they have the context to take action and to really turn this into to make this backfire next time the government contemplates these tactics.
Thanks, Kai. Kanahus, I can see Kanahus is still there. It just occurred to me, and actually Naomi was thinking the same thing. When we talk about building these relationships and these fights that have been going on and continue to reach inflection points, Kanahus, do you think it's too late to stop the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline?
No, it's not too late. I mean, they already have an existing line 1 that we have never with.
The next steps for that struggle.
Well, I just wanted to add on to what Kai was saying about the contractors, because we're dealing with a very violent, volatile situation that's about to erupt here at Tiny House Warriors 2, just due to the contractors, the security contractors, CGL and TMX. They're both using these security contractors that are going, like Kai said, rogue security, going out of their way to be the policing force for this colonial government. They're using private security personnel. They're using all of this high-tech mobile surveillance units, all powered by solar. They invented a new division called the Community Industry Response Group just to deal with us resisting against pipelines. We have lawsuits. I'm encouraging all Indigenous land defenders to also lay some lawsuits against the RCMP for their violence against us when they're arresting us. We need to defund CIRG completely. CIRG meaning the Community Industry Response Group. Some of the actions that people in your audience can take. E-Division is the one that, headed the raids against Wet'suwet'en. E-Division is ones that heading the Community Industry Response Group, CIRG, and they're coming right to our home every day. We have a saying, a home for a home. You come into our home, we go into your home. I really like what the police anti-police terror group in Oakland, what they did in defunding the Oakland police. They went right to their home at 10 o'clock at night with a whole bunch of people, and they wouldn't let them sleep. That's what they're doing to us. Let's do it to them. Let's go to their homes. Direct action really works. Look at the youth when they shut down all those insurance companies for Trans Mountain. It really worked. Insurance companies start pulling, like 17 insurance companies start pulling their underwriting Trans Mountain company. The actions that we need right now is to the financing. Anything part of the finance apparatus, any insurance company, credit rating company, S&P, Swiss Wall Street. It's not New York Wall Street. It's the Swiss Wall Street. It's in Zurich. Our human rights we fight for there. We'll fight for. We'll go right to Geneva. We'll expose Canada. But if we want to hit their money, we got to go to Zurich, and we're going to be going back there with some major lawsuits. Canada's not going to open up their doors and say, "Come on, business here." There's risk involved in it, and us Indigenous people were the biggest risk out there for any finance company, bank, or institution. That as activists, we really need to look at the flow chart and decision making and where they're making their decisions regarding access to our lands, to these pipelines. Like, there's statutory decision makers behind those desks signing off on those agreements, signing our genocide. They have a face and they have addresses, and that type of direct action really works. We've seen it work. So we need people to take that courage. Marching is nice. We get to see all our friends marching, but is it really creating the real change that we need in this country, in this world? We're going to have to step it up a notch. We got to start escalating. They're escalating. Let's start to escalate, and let's start to, face off. Like I heard him say, we're weak, and we're weak. Yeah, we may have pennies, which is non-existent in Canada, fighting billions, but the power we have is in our spirit. The power we have is in our intellect, because I know that room full, if you could switch the camera on, I could see that room full. I know if we took all those skills of every single person in that room, we're going to be able to make a big master plan to actually get our land back. And I know that people that are here in the audience, people that are listening to this, are doing it because they really believe. They really believe that we have a chance to win, or else we'd just be at home covered up in our blanket and just gave up. No, we know we can win. That's why we're still here. We're still fighting on, and we're not going to let Trans Mountain flow this diluted bitumen pipeline from the tar sands. It's toxic and it's going to kill. And we're willing to put our lives on the line, our freedom on the line, and we're willing to do that. We expect the rest of Canada to be willing to stand by us and do that too, because we're doing this for our water, our air. We all benefit from it.
Kanahus, I tried to put up a big, beautiful shot of everyone in the room for you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Hang out if you can. If you got to go, we understand. We're going to move things into the room for a little bit now. And our next speaker, sitting right next to me, is Anjali Apadurai, a longtime climate activist, works at Sierra Club BC, as well as the Climate Emergency Unit, and just recently returned from the circus in Glasgow.
I like that you called it the circus. It certainly was that. Okay, is this okay? Hi, everyone. I'm Anjali. I've been a climate activist in various capacities for a number of years. And, you know, this moment that we're seeing in BC right now is something that I've never seen before. And it's all colliding for me, having just returned from Scotland. And what I really love about the framing of this event is that it's continually connecting this string of devastating climate impacts to what's happening on Wet'suwet'en lands right now. And that is the key in the way that we move forward. Because really what's missing in climate action right now, and what this moment is asking from each of us, is that we expose and we name the choices at the heart of what our government is doing right now, and name them as intentional choices. The situation right now with, you know, physical helicopters being sent, like these precious resources being sent to arrest land defenders who are enforcing Indigenous laws on Wet'suwet'en lands over flood victims here where there's an unprecedented climate disaster. That crystal clear choice kind of encapsulates the broader choice that's being made right now across our province and across our world. The deliberate choice to prioritize corporate profits over people and the planet. In our recently announced climate plan in BC, we see that there's, we're in the middle of a climate emergency, and our climate plan does not address LNG in the province. Why is LNG allowed to expand until at least 2030? Canada's broader climate plan, which was just made, paraded around in Scotland at the COP, also does not begin to curb oil and gas until 2030. And so that is a deliberate choice. And so it's in our power right now to name that choice. And by naming it, and by saying that we stand on the other side of that choice, we hopefully can rob it of its power. And so it's another choice right now that RCMP, as Kai mentioned, are being deployed to protect Coastal GasLink's injunction over protecting Indigenous rights and title, which are upheld in law. There are lawsuits in BC that uphold Indigenous rights and title to their lands, specifically Wet'suwet'en rights and title to their lands. So again, a crystal clear choice. And so by situating ourselves on the other side of that choice, where we don't have firepower, but we have the moral high ground, that's how we rob it of its power. And it begins in rooms like this. I mean, at the COP in Scotland, we saw really, really limited participation. There's the pandemic, and there's this vaccine apartheid across the world right now, which is mirroring the apartheid of climate change. It's the same people, it's the same fault lines. And that lack of participation really stunted some of what we were able to do as activists and as civil society. And that is only going to continue in the last kicks of late stage neoliberal capitalism, that it's only going to limit our physical capacity more and more. It's only going to separate us and isolate us more and more. I mean, as we were running our campaign, snap election, 30 days to run a federal campaign, the same sort of constraints of capitalism were what's stopping us from actually organizing against it. You know, people have sicknesses, and people have to work way more hours than they should need to, and all of those same constraints. And so it begins in a room like this, where we choose to organize despite all of that and recognize that it's only going to continue. The forces that we are up against will only continue to seek to divide. And so every time we get in a room like this and we just talk about it, that's where we begin to reclaim the power. So.
I'm going to keep moving through the speakers in the room so that we can start having a conversation among all of us here. We are very, very honored and excited to have our next guest. Chief Ninawá is an honored visitor to UBC, just came from the airport as part of an extraordinary intellectual exchange. He's a visiting scholar here. Chief Ninawá is a hereditary chief of the Huni indigenous people of the Amazon, a people that launched the Last Warning educational campaign against ecocide in the Amazon rainforest and the threat of indigenous genocide in Brazil. Chief Ninawá is going to be on campus for a couple of weeks and is returning for a whole year. And so this is the first of many important interventions from this extraordinary leader. Welcome and thank you. Oh, and I forgot that Vanessa will be translating. Big up for the translator, please. Thank you.
Eu quero parabenizar os organizadores deste evento, que é um evento muito importante.
I would like to congratulate the organizers of this event because this is a very important event.
E quero dizer mais que o espaço é muito importante, uma universidade.
And that this space is extremely important in a university.
Quero dizer da satisfação de estar aqui nessa mesa com cada lutador.
I'm very happy to be in this table with warriors.
Como foi falado, eu venho da região amazônica do Brasil.
As has been said before, I come from the Amazon region in Brazil.
Eu represento 118 aldeias do meu povo.
I represent 118 villages of my people.
Eu sou cacique hereditário no meu povo.
I'm a hereditary chief.
Nós estamos mais de 16 mil Huni.
We are more than 16,000 Huni people.
E nós também lutamos no nosso território contra os empreendimentos predatórios.
We also fight in our territories against predatory enterprises.
Nós enfrentamos madeireiros.
We fight against the logging companies.
Nós enfrentamos o garimpo.
Mining companies.
Nós enfrentamos o agronegócio, que é com agropecuária, e o agronegócio de monocultura.
We also fight against the agribusiness that is about cattle ranching and monocultures.
Nós enfrentamos também, agora bem recente, teve o leilão, e a Eneva leiloou blocos de petróleo na região amazônica.
And now we have recently had to face the selling off of blocks of land for petroleum extraction.
E nós estamos enfrentando, sofrendo os impactos dessas contaminações.
And we are facing the impact of contaminations of pollution.
E também sofrendo os impactos das mudanças climáticas.
And also facing the impacts of climate change.
Nos nossos territórios, o clima já não é normal como era antigamente.
In our territories, we have unusual weather patterns. Different from before.
Como tem acontecido nessa cidade, as inundações.
We also have floods like what's happening in British Columbia.
Nós também tivemos as maiores inundações já que aconteceu na região amazônica, principalmente nos nossos territórios.
Our territories have faced also last year the largest floods that were registered
Nós tivemos, com as últimas enchentes desse ano de 2021, 584 famílias Huni desabrigadas.
We had 584 families that lost their houses.
Nós perdemos casa, a nossa agricultura de subsistência,
We have lost our houses and our subsistence agriculture fields.
as águas foram contaminadas. Hoje nossas comunidades estão sem saneamento básicos.
Our water was contaminated. We don't have sewage systems.
E no período da seca, no ano de 2020, na região amazônica, no Pantanal,
So in the period of droughts in the region of Pantanal in 2020,
aconteceu o maior incêndio causado criminosamente pelas pessoas,
we had the largest criminal fire
aonde matou diversos animais,
where animals died
destruiu quilômetros de floresta,
and kilometers of the forest were destroyed.
e que depois essas áreas elas foram utilizadas, invadidas pelas próprias pessoas do agronegócio.
And afterwards, these lands that were devastated were invaded by people who are interested in the agribusiness.
Esses grandes impactos que são causados dentro dos nossos territórios,
These big impacts that are affecting our territories,
e principalmente a monocultura, elas são apenas para ser exportada,
particularly the monocultures, they serve to be as exports
para os países que são considerados com maior desenvolvimento econômico,
to the so-called developed countries,
apenas para gerar lucro aos bancos e essas empresas predatórias.
to generate profits to the banks and to predatory businesses.
Poucas pessoas têm noção que esses produtos exportados do Brasil, que vêm para esses países,
Few people know that the products that are exported from Brazil to the rich countries,
eles vêm a custo de assassinato de lideranças, vêm a custo da expulsão dos territórios dos povos indígenas,
they have a cost, and this cost involves the assassination of indigenous leaders. It involves the loss of indigenous territories.
e aqui eu sou solidário a essa luta dos povos indígenas que foram presos.
I'm here in solidarity with the people who were arrested.
Lá no Brasil já virou comum,
In Brazil, it's common.
porque o fazendeiro vai na casa do pai de família e atira na cabeça dele, passa com o carro em cima da criança,
So in Brazil, the farmers go to the houses of people to shoot them in the head, and they also run over the kids.
e já virou senso comum.
And now it's just common sense.
As mídias já não mostram mais.
That the media doesn't really show it anymore.
Como ela falou, eu também, há 10 anos, eu participo da conferência organizada pelas Nações Unidas, a Conferência das Partes sobre o Clima.
For 10 years, I have participated in the COPs and the United Nations Conference about Climate Change.
E eu também acabei de voltar da COP26, que aconteceu na Escócia,
I have just come back from COPs 26 that took part in Scotland,
aonde o principal tema discutido foi o artigo 6 do Acordo de Paris,
The main theme that was discussed was Article 6 of the Paris Accord,
que simplesmente fala sobre, de uma forma mais comum, uma maneira de recolonizar novamente os territórios indígenas para a financiarização da natureza.
that in simple terms talks about the recolonization of indigenous territories for the financialization of nature.
E eu confesso que voltei muito triste dessa COP.
I confess that I came back extremely disappointed.
Eu voltei sem nenhuma esperança de mudanças concretas,
I came without any hope of any concrete action,
porque está muito claro que quem financia As COPs são as verdadeiras, são as principais multinacionais que destroem predatoriamente os nossos territórios.
Because it's clear that those who finance these meetings are those multinationals that destroy our territories.
E que são as mesmas multinacionais que estão colocando em risco a extinção da humanidade.
The same multinationals that are putting the humanity at risk of extinction.
As negociações que são feitas nas COP, as negociações ambientais, elas só têm o foco, o principal, são os interesses dessas multinacionais.
The focus of the negotiations at COP are the interests of the multinationals.
Aonde os governos, quando negociam com as multinacionais, essas próprias multinacionais têm a intenção de poder dar como compensação recursos financeiros para os governos.
So in these negotiations, the multinationals compensate the governments with financial resources.
E colocam a responsabilidade dos governos para discutirem mitigação dessas próprias destruição dessas empresas.
So the governments then have the role of mitigating the effects of the destruction that these multinationals cause.
E esses recursos que são dados, como foi anunciado pelo primeiro-ministro do Reino Unido, 1,7 bilhões de dólares para a preservação da Amazônia.
So like the UK government announced $1.7 million for preservation of the Amazon, these resources.
Esses recursos obrigam o governo a flexibilizar a legislação que protege o meio ambiente, que protege os direitos dos povos indígenas, que protege a biodiversidade.
So these resources force the governments to flexibilize the legislation that protects biodiversity, that protects the territories, and that protects the environment.
E flexibilizando essas leis, garante que as próprias multinacionais continuem fazendo a destruição, fazendo seus empreendimentos dentro dos nossos territórios.
The flexibilization of this legislation supports these multinationals to keep doing what they're doing in the destruction of, in relation to the destruction of our territories.
E nesse contexto, o governo, quando sai da COP, volta aos seus países apenas como gerente dessas empresas para gerenciar esses recursos.
So when the governments leave COP, they are just the managers of resources of mitigation for the destruction.
E quem diz o que tem que fazer são as próprias multinacionais. Nós estamos acabando de ouvir um testemunho aqui de uma comunidade que é prova viva de como o governo age apoiando as decisões que as multinacionais tomam.
So in this context, the governments are there just to manage these resources, but those who call the shots are the multinationals. And here, as we saw in the examples today, the government is there to protect the interests of the multinationals rather than the interests of the people.
E um outro exemplo muito claro dessas convergências de soluções, principalmente do clima, do que está acontecendo, são a discussão da financiarização da natureza, principalmente com crédito de carbono.
So another example of the convergence of interests is the promotion of carbon trading as a sustainable solution.
São mais de 30 anos discutindo a mudança do problema global sobre questões climáticas.
This has been discussed for more than 30 years as a solution to climate change.
E nós não vemos nenhuma mudança acontecendo em lugar nenhum.
And we don't see any change happening anywhere.
Muito pelo contrário, a destruição tem triplicado cada ano.
On the contrary, the destruction has been tripled each year.
E essas compensações que são pagas pelas multinacionais, como eu já mencionei, elas dão o direito, tiram a responsabilidade da destruição dessas multinacionais. Elas ficam inocentes.
So the carbon offsets allow the companies to continue business as usual unhindered and absolves them of the crimes that are committed in the name of this type of development.
E elas ganham o direito de continuar destruindo, criminalizando lideranças, assassinando lideranças.
They feel that they are in the right to keep murdering our people, murdering our leaders, and offering all these types of aggression.
Por isso que eu tenho, durante 10 anos que eu venho dizendo, que soluções baseadas em carbono não são soluções verdadeiras. São falsas soluções mencionadas para enganar a sociedade.
For the last 10 years, I've been saying that the carbon trading is not a solution. They are fake solutions that are just here to deceive society.
E ainda emprega uma nova maneira de colonizar os nossos territórios, porque o crédito de carbono empodera, faz com que o governo local se apodere dos territórios, domine os territórios para fazer as negociações.
So this is another form of colonialism in our territories because it empowers the local governments to have more dominion over our territories, to appropriate our territories again.
E tudo isso vai contra os nossos direitos, contra os direitos da natureza, contra os direitos humanos, contra os direitos constitucionais que temos em nossos países.
And this goes against all the rights that we have, the rights of nature, the human rights, and all the rights that we have conquered and achieved in our countries.
É preciso mudar.
It's important to change.
E nós, enquanto povos indígenas, povos originários, sempre estamos dizendo que nós temos soluções. O sistema tem que aceitar que nós somos soluções.
We have to have the system here that we are the solutions. We have the solutions and we are the solutions to these problems.
A prova é que nós somos apenas 4% da população mundial.
The proof is that indigenous people are only 4% of the global population.
Mas que está comprovado cientificamente que 80% da biodiversidade do planeta está na proteção dos povos indígenas, está sendo cuidado pelos povos indígenas.
But they protect 80% of the biodiversity of the planet.
E a Amazônia, ela está perto de ter uma inflexão aonde se os desmatamentos continuarem, milhares de seres vivos vão desaparecer, inclusive seres humanos.
The Amazon is close to a tipping point where further deforestation will cause the disappearance of lots of beings, including human beings.
E nós, como guardiões da floresta, nós temos lutado todos os dias.
We as guardians of the forest have fought every day.
Mesmo que para isso nós tenhamos que dar a nossa própria vida.
Even if we have to give our lives in the process.
E nós estamos fazendo isso, não é só pelo nosso povo.
And we're doing this not just for our people.
Nós fazemos isso pela humanidade também.
We're doing this for humanity.
Por isso que nós precisamos do apoio da sociedade. Nós precisamos estar junto para combater esse crime que está acontecendo.
That's why we need your support. We need to be together to be able to fight all these crimes that are happening.
E se eu estou aqui hoje, e se eu venho para cá, é porque eu acredito que nós podemos contar com o apoio de cada um de vocês.
And if I'm here today, it's because I believe that we can count on the support of every single one of you.
Nós temos que decidir hoje qual é o mundo que nós queremos para o futuro, qual é o mundo que nós queremos para os nossos filhos.
We have to decide today what kind of world we want for ourselves in the future, what kind of world we want for our children.
E nós só vamos fazer isso acontecer através das nossas atitudes. Se nós não mudar a maneira em que nós estamos se relacionando hoje, para decidir o mundo que nós queremos, os nossos filhos vão sofrer uma consequência ainda pior do que nós estamos vivendo. Muito obrigado pela atenção de vocês.
So today, if we don't change our ways, if we don't change the relationships we have and the decisions that we make, our children are going to face much worse than what we are facing today. Thank you, everybody.
Chief Ninawá, thank you so much. I'm so glad that someone brought up the question of false solutions. And we've seen Indigenous leadership around the world, and especially coming from countries in the global South, crying for decades, crying aloud about the solutions that are being advanced here in rich countries like Canada that actually pave landscapes in other countries with monocultures, fake carbon trading schemes that global corporations can just game to extend the life of business as usual, which is blanketing our planet in toxicity. And I think that it's really important to underline this in this moment. And I want to turn the corner now to the students, and I want you to start preparing your comments and questions in the room. And I'm going to go to Yasmina next. But just with this thought, we are carrying a tremendous amount of climate anxiety and grief with parts of this province that will be in desperate straits for a long time, rebuilding infrastructure, dealing with the contamination of land that Chief Ninawá was also talking about in the aftermath of floods, and all of the loss of life and the trauma of these events that we know are piled on top of the heat events from barely 100 days or so ago, which are exacerbating the future disasters that we're preparing for. And we live in a province and in a country where all levels of government have a plan. And they've told us we're going to be net zero by 2050. Every major corporation, every major financial institution, the big 5 banks, all of the titans of the global economy have rolled out their plans for net zero by 2050. And what we're hearing from the front lines on this land and from Chief Ninawá's land and from everywhere else is that those plans are full of loopholes. You can drive a pipeline through. You can drive a fossil fuel truck of gargantuan proportions right through the loopholes in those plans. The number of false solutions, the number of unproven technologies, the number of silver bullets that we're being asked to put our faith in is just ridiculous. And the reason that it's really important to underline this, and I'm really glad that it came up, is because we are in a state of emergency and a state of grief and a state of anxiety, and we want someone to be doing something. But we live in an age of double discourse. I'm starting to think that we've entered the era of the co-optocene, where the way that movement folks speak is now being echoed from the thrones of power, but it doesn't mean the same thing when they say it. And so we have to urgently decode the solutions that are on the table and assert ever more boldly the solutions that will actually work, the ones we've seen land defenders throwing down behind in this land right at this moment. And so the false solutions thing is something I hope people will really take to heart, do your homework on, and devote some of the activism towards. This is a really mobilized student body at this institution. We've seen a couple of years of growing, escalating mobilization in the student body. Naomi credited it with our appearance here, the creation of many new spaces that have come out of organizing right here. Yasmina Seiffeddine is one of those organizers with Climate Justice UBC. And in the spirit of moving this conversation from a definition of the emergency into strategies for action, I know that Yasmina is going to talk about some of the victories that have happened here on this campus and some of the future work that is starting to happen now. Yasmina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yasmina, and I'm one of the coordinators at Climate Justice UBC. I want to start off first by acknowledging that we are all here today because of the immeasurable disappointments we've had to endure due to our so-called leaders. We've not just experienced this summer's heat dome, but more recently the devastating floods that have affected livelihoods across BC because our provincial leadership has failed to properly address the climate emergency. And I know it has been a rough time for folks, and I want you all to know that your grief Your sorrow and your anxieties are shared, heard, and felt. But I also want to offer a remedy of hope. If there has ever been a time to be involved in student activism, it is right now. We are capable of materializing a reality we want, one where we can rebuild away from these inequitable systems and reimagine alternatives. Take divestment, for example. UBC's commitment to divest from fossil fuels cannot be spoken of without mentioning and accrediting the hard work that began way back in 2013, when students at CJUBC began what would become a 6-year campaign. A campaign that was continuously changing, adapting, and evolving, but has in the end brought us this victory in 2019. A victory we are seeing in universities across the world, and even at our neighbors at SFU and UVic. Our universities have a long history of student activists who continue to make change at the university and beyond, and that history is still in the making. This past week, we released a community reinvestment campaign, a collaboration between CJUBC, SFU 350, and Divest UVic. This campaign is lobbying for our universities to each commit 10% of their endowments to community reinvestment. That totals to $400 million.
Yeah.
$400 million that would go straight into the local economy, enabling new affordable housing projects, community-owned renewable energy, worker-owned cooperatives, social enterprises, and sustainable local food systems. In other words, these investments can help create the more resilient and cared-for communities that we need in light of injustices such as militarized attacks on land defenders, fossil fuel subsidies, and overall climate violence. The solutions aren't far, far away. They're here at UBC. Universities in particular have a responsibility to students and their communities, and thus should be treated as corporations that we have the power to hold accountable in order to invest in our futures and prioritize people over profit. Now is the time for our institutions to serve our local communities facing the climate crisis instead of foreign and faceless corporations fueling it. It's time for a people's endowment.
Yeah.
Now, I know that in the past weeks and months of unprecedented wildfires and floods, many of us are feeling climate anxiety. It's hard to see a solution to something that can feel large and uncontrollable. But at CJUBC, we value creating community and a culture of care. We emphasize hope in our organizing because despite everything, there is still hope to be embraced. We have fostered change before, and we can do it again now. And we hope that you'll see that this is true by joining us on this reinvestment campaign to reimagine alternative economies and institutions that value people, the environment, and the community over profit. On a more personal note, I wanted to share with you an idea I feel has helped me cope with my climate anxiety, but has more importantly inspired within me a new perspective on how to look at our collective futures. I recently learned about Grace Lee Boggs, and for those of you who don't know who she was, Boggs was an activist at the front line of the Black Power movement and a highly acclaimed writer and philosopher, to say the very least. She is most known for her ever so brilliant ideas on revolution and evolution. Essentially, her main idea takes on the concept that a revolution is not a rebellion, not just resistance or protest, but in fact something that can create real, lasting, and sustainable change. Revolutions start when we choose to evolve first. We can never have a revolution without first turning to ourselves and unlearning destructive ideas that have manifested within us. And thus, by undoing what we've internalized and realizing our own positionality, we can relearn how we must be and exist with each other in order to demand and foster the change we deserve, and we must start right here at UBC. The kind of revolution we need means rebuilding, regrowing, and reinvesting in our communities. So I hope in times of climate distress, you can turn to this idea and ask yourself what you want to see in the world, and see it in yourself first. Thank you.
Yasmina, whoa. Wow, I'm glad we saved Yasmina for the last speaker. That was absolutely amazing. I want to open the mic. I'm sorry, we were going to have wireless mics, but we decided that was like one techno trick too far. So we have got a mic down here at the front. I want to invite people in the audience to come with questions for any of the panelists, but I don't want to just restrict it to questions. If someone has something they need to get off their chest, it's always annoying when people say their thing and then try to put a question mark at the end. Comments are welcome. We are here to come together and try to strategize. If this turns into a mass organizing meeting, that's fine. questions or hesitations, if people have criticisms or suggestions, let's bring it. I know it's always a little crunchy at the first one. Somebody's got to actually come to the mic. We up here have been talking at you for a while. So I'm going to invite some brave student to come. Here's our first student. Yes. Say your name if you don't mind, and then take it away.
Yeah, hi. It's a little intimidating to start off. I
You're,
just want to say
you're amazing. Thank you.
my name is Rachel Drew, and I'm actually in the developmental program, a PhD student here at UBC. And I have been spending a lot of time on the front lines at Appadurai, otherwise known as Fairy Creek, this year. And basically, this is another struggle that's going on in our province with land rights and colonial greed, and I'm seeing that firsthand out there. And so I've also, faced the brunt. I've been up against the RCMP and the CIRG as a settler ally for Indigenous land defenders there. And so one of my questions, when I'm there on the land, one of the things that I really feel is support from a broad community. There's a lot of learning that goes on there, a lot of teaching from Indigenous elders, and I feel really connected and really supported, and I feel like that anxiety really floods right out of me, like it just disappears, because I feel like I have purpose, and I really I have a place or a role to play. And then when I come back to the city, I almost feel hit with this sort of sense of hopelessness, and I feel like there's almost apathy in the general broader public outside of our community here. And I first of all just wonder how we can address that, how we can really be here in the city and face that head on and find ways to navigate through that. And the other question that I really have that's really related is just about how when I am talking to people here about what's going on, we often have something come up in our conversations about elected chief and hereditary lineage, and it's something that I feel like a lot of individuals that I've spoken to are almost using to promote the status quo and to sort of stay in that place. And I'm wondering what the panel thinks about this. I know it's a tough question to start with, but this idea of elected chief support for extraction of resources and hereditary lineage and land defenders who are supporting the hereditary lineage, and also how we can better navigate that moving ahead, and how to respond to people who use that, and the government included, use that to try and divide us and to try and keep us from working together. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just checking to see if Kanahus was still with us, and I think she had to go. That would have been an ideal perspective to get on that question of the Indian Act government structures versus hereditary chiefs. So I think we're gonna, unless someone on the panel is aching to take that up, I think we should probably leave it and try to connect you with an Indigenous perspective, which would be more appropriate on that one. I think it is really, it's worth remarking that this very moment, though, that we're in, features the Wet'suwet'en who pursued one of the most significant Supreme Court cases in the state in the colonial state of Canada's history. The Delgamuukw decision specifically recognized the unextinguished title of those hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en, who are the ones who are unanimously rejecting this project. So I think, obviously these things have a lot of specificity in the land that you're talking about, and it's not really a great look for settler panelists to take on this question. But I do think it's worth noting that our Canadian courts have weighed in on exactly that land and on exactly that question, and that's an important piece of background to this current conflict. I think you were talking, though, as well about coming back to the city after being out in the middle of a land struggle. and the ebb and flow of your own climate anxiety, grief, and sense of purpose. And I do think that is something that some of us can speak to from the table around how you feel when you're in direct action, when you're in action, as opposed to when you're, you know, in the hard surfaces of the urban environment. So Anjali, I'm going to put you on the spot because you just got back from the biggest conference in the climate world that takes place in bubbles of canned air and hotel rooms, and you're coming back to the land where you live, where things are really happening on the land.
Yeah, there's so much to say here. I think, you know, a really big learning for me over the past couple of years is recognizing the link between my connection to land and the heart of climate justice, which is connection to land, which is a memory held by Indigenous peoples. And most of us those of us who are not Indigenous are all displaced. And so there is a distorted relationship to land that needs to be healed. So that's one aspect of it. Me as an immigrant, my relationship to land is, you know, I've had to redefine that over the years. And so I think that's one key piece of it, is that climate justice happens fundamentally with a relationship to land. And that's what the Wet'suwet'en land defenders are defending right now. And there's a wisdom to that and a logic to that that is directly opposite to the logic of extractivism. I think another tremendous source of power is when I think about how to organize effectively in the face of this. Yes, there are hubs of organizing that are always good to gravitate towards. I mean, the amazing work that's happening at Climate Justice UBC is like a great place to gravitate. And then also there are sources of power when we look around us in our lives. Each of us is connected to different networks and to different institutions in our lives. I mean, if you stop and make a list of all the institutions you're connected to, whether it's your school, whether it's, you know, a religious institution, or whether it's you know, there are so many intersecting networks that we are part of. And those, I would encourage all of us, and this is a learning for myself too, to tap those networks and to look in unconventional places for those networks and for those sources of power.
The mic is free for the next brave person. In the meantime, yeah, you got a question? Yeah, come on up. Great. Thanks for being such a great audience member too. I've enjoyed your nodding.
Can I take my mask off?
Please do, to speak.
Hi.
And speak right into the mic, it'll help.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for speaking. Yasmina, Chief, Naomi, hi, I'm kind of fangirling a little bit. Anjali, Avi, nice to see you guys again. I was volunteering on both your campaigns. And I guess my question is kind of more connected directly to that, is a lot of us who were involved in the last election were really excited about kind of an orange wave happening and maybe getting some true progressives and like climate activists like you both are into parliament, while also being weary of the fact that we're not going to get much progress in an institution that was never meant to be progressive, I guess, in those words. So how do you think, I know both of you have been involved in activism, politics wasn't the first route you guys went down. So I guess how can like us who are feeling disenfranchised, and we heard one of the speakers talk about throwing out like your NDP cards in the run up to the provincial, which is different from the NDP you were in, but still, how do you think we can move past kind of that into like true organizing, like getting over the election and all this kind of stuff and moving to true change through like understanding the intersectionality of struggles from Palestine to Wet'suwet'en to the Amazon, like understanding that and moving forward within a university experience and also within like the city we're in and the country we're in?
A fantastic question, thank you. And I think you started to answer it. And I think that what the political moment that we're in, as I said, is a perilous one, because there is so much bullshit being said from the seats of political leadership in this country. And I think it's, and one of the things that Anjali and I both tried to communicate as people who are not from the political class, but tried to intervene from a movement point of view into the political system. One of the things I think we both tried to convey was, We can't ignore electoral politics, but nor can we put our faith in it. And I think what we're seeing in the painful contradictions of the provincial government in British Columbia are at an all-time high right now. So, you know, the BC climate update, the roadmap, was being touted around Glasgow as some award-winning climate plan, while hundreds of organizations in British Columbia were saying it's utterly insufficient. And whereas we supported this government 3 years ago in laying down these markers, you are not actually making it real, right? And so we have all of these juxtapositions, and for the same government to be proudly declaring that it's legislated the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, while sending those RCMP officers a plane load in the midst of a disaster to violently evict people from their own land. You know, we clearly cannot put all of our faith in electoral politics for the solutions. But when we're talking about slashing our emissions globally in half in less than a decade, when we're talking about getting off fossil fuels in a way that doesn't punish those communities and those workers who rely on the old economy for their livelihoods, we need the power and the resources of the state to do it. And so we need interventions in the electoral sphere and in the space of colonial government. We simply need them. And so I think that the way we've been seeing in the United States and Canada in the last few years is a more fluid movement of organizing, of social movement organizers entering the electoral sphere, not as a life choice, but as a temporary tactic. And there's lots of skills and tools that can be learned and used there, and then going right back into climate justice organizing the way folks in this room are doing, without crying about the political calculation, because we never invested all of our faith in it in the first place. And I think that we have opportunities to cross that line, and young people can run for office and move back into movement space, and that we shouldn't see it as like opposing forces, but just tools to be used when there are opportunities. I think Kai was saying that if John Horgan decides to move on, and there's a leadership race within the NDP for premier of this province, that there will be a moment when the climate justice movement can try to find a candidate, can try to step up and intervene in a contest that will lead to the highest office in this province. And that would be a very strategic use of movement energy that might present itself. But they really have to sort of identify the moments to throw down and understand that we have limited capacity as humans and we have to choose our battles. But I think all battles need to be fought.
It can't be anyone from the current caucus.
What did he say? What'd you say, Kai?
I said it can't be anyone from the current caucus. They all wear this. So
Right.
if there's going to be a new premier, a new NDP leader in BC who has a shred of credibility on the climate file, they're going to have to come from movements. They're going to have to come from outside of the BC NDP caucus.
And that's exactly, yeah, exactly, right? Hey, Kai, have you considered this?
We got two politicians on stage. I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring with you guys sitting there.
No, but this was my experience too. I ran for federal office in this last election, and I was one of those activists that like really wrote off electoral politics before this, and I was like, there was a firewall between what I do and what I believe in, and like radical movement politics, and like this electoral system, which is bullshit and which is like static and monolithic and like has this old thinking attached to it. And my thinking this year has really evolved on that. And when I decided to run, there's a box that people who come from movements who decide to enter the electoral system continually get pushed into, and that box is your choice of party. Like, why are you choosing this party? Isn't there a disconnect between you associating your name with this party and then the actions of this party? And of course, I was feeling deep grief at what was happening in Fairy Creek at the time when we just started our campaigns. And my thinking on this now is that a political party to me now is not this monolithic thing. It is a site of struggle, just like all these other sites of struggle. And we need to start seeing it as such. And I don't wear it as a label that defines me. I don't wear it as any kind of static thing. It is and should be a shifting playing field. And there should be this sort of like interplay between movements and office. And it is a tremendous place to build and reclaim power.
Thank you. I'm going to move to a question from someone in the online audience. And this is for, Sorry, was there someone else? Oh, yeah, good. Chief Ninawá wants to weigh in on the question of the NDP and BC. Just kidding.
Bom, agradecer a participação, né? Boas perguntas. Eu queria contribuir um pouco com essa pergunta.
Good questions. I would like to weigh in on this one.
Bom, a primeira coisa é que realmente nós não podemos ficar esperando que a mudança venha de algum governo, seja ele progressista, seja ele da ditadura.
So we cannot wait for the change to come from the government, be it progressive government or a dictator.
Nós estamos muito convencidos disso, porque, ao exemplo do Brasil, nós estamos há 521 anos lutando. Entre governo, sai governo, nós tivemos sempre a mesma luta.
Indigenous people know it very well. In the example of Brazil, it's 512 years of struggle, and one government comes, another one leaves, and it's the same fight.
Uma das coisas que eu estou sempre dizendo, aonde eu passo, é que tem muitas atitudes em que nós podemos tomar. E eu vou dar uns exemplos.
So what I've been saying is that there are lots of attitudes that we can take or have, and I'm going to give some examples.
Nós estamos com um projeto na nossa comunidade que é chamado Recuperação Justa, que é a gente plantar árvores. Nós estamos dizendo que nós precisamos arborizar o nosso planeta.
So one of the projects that we have, it's about just recuperation, where it is a lot about planting trees.
Mas de plantar árvore por uma atitude nossa, para que nós podemos criar uma responsabilidade com a biodiversidade. Não se ater apenas nos programas que são discutidos pelos governos de plantar árvore, não, por uma atitude nossa mesmo.
But this has to be an attitude that comes from the people rather than imposed by the government.
Um exemplo muito prático, a comunidade aqui está lutando para proteger um rio, está sendo criminalizados. A atitude da outra estudante que falou primeiro, de que foi lá, se colocou à frente, essa é uma atitude verdadeira que podemos tomar quando estamos apoiando uma luta. Às vezes a gente sempre fala que está à disposição, mas para ir para o acampamento, se juntar com essas pessoas, são poucos que vão estar à disposição para ir.
It's talking about the willingness of people to show up for indigenous struggles, be it in Fairy Creek, as one of the students talked about, but putting yourself at risk as a shield for indigenous people is one of the examples.
No nosso povo, por nós não estarmos muito mais acreditando em lei do papel, nós tomamos iniciativas e nós estamos temos uma educação específica, onde uma das partes principais é fortalecer a nossa juventude espiritualmente.
So in our people, we don't believe in the law of the paper anymore. So we have to do something else. And in order to empower our youth, we have to empower them spiritually.
Porque isso vai nos garantir verdadeiramente de uma proteção de nós estarmos lá dentro, com os nossos conhecimentos, se fortalecendo espiritualmente cada vez mais. Porque, às vezes, as leis que são feitas num papel, elas são feitas, as próprias pessoas que fazem não conseguem cumprir.
So the law of the paper, even the people who write the papers cannot fulfill what is written there, and that's why if we strengthen people spiritually, we strengthen our knowledge systems, and we know how people are going to show up.
Mas nem por isso nós temos que desistir. É muito importante essa jovem hoje está lá dentro para ter a oportunidade de mudar, de fazer diferente, de mudar essa realidade.
So we can't give up on the state either. We need to infiltrate like you did.
Translator comment.
Porque senão vai ser só mais uma pessoa que teve um grande sonho e não conseguiu. E para finalizar, dizer que tem uma ação muito importante que você pode fazer dentro do Congresso. Hoje está se discutindo alternativas jurídica internacional. E tem hoje a lei do ecocídio, que está sendo discutido em todos os lugares. O México, um senador do México, está com um projeto de lei para inserir dentro do Código Penal mexicano a lei de ecocídio para poder responsabilizar quem verdadeiramente destrói, governos e as empresas.
There's something very important that you need to do in Congress. He is talking about the example from Mexico, where the law of the ecocide law was, I think that's an ecocide bill became law, where the people who are really destroying the environment, like the government itself and the corporations, can be legally at least identified.
Obrigado.
Obrigado. All right, we are coming close to the end of the event. I just want to let everybody know that there's another event right after this one. We've got a hard out in about 10 minutes, and we're going to pack up really quickly. And we're going to ask everyone to sort of drift off and do the post-event schmoozing on another level, maybe. I've also heard a rumor that the next event is like an Extinction Rebellion thing, so there could be a lot of overlap. So let's see what happens. But we're going to end here sharp at 5:40 as we were asked to. We only obey when there are others, you know, that we respect. But I do want to open some space for Naomi to share some reflections and weave together some thoughts that have come up over the course of this. We've had a few great interventions from the online audience. And so Naomi, whether you choose to deal with them or not, I'll just read a couple of the questions that came in from the online audience who stuck it out through an interesting Zoom experience. There was a question from Claudia. Should we demand talking about 2030 instead of 2050? Which I think we probably all are feeling that. I feel accepting talking about 2050 leads to cop-outs, deferrals, excuses. We need to talk about now, have a vision and a strategy for now to 2030 that will set the trend and path forward and beyond. So I think that was one of those questions which really is a powerful statement in itself. And someone from the Institute for Policy Studies said that they would be curious to hear the panelists speak about the role of militarism in these crises and how as movements we can intervene. And I think that's a thread that has been really, really present in all of the interventions today, increasing militarization of attacks on land defenders, but in our society in general. And we know that that's something that Chief Ninawá has been on the front lines of for a very long time as people outside of privileged struggles coming from settlers in environmental world in countries like Canada, people in